The day before our wedding, my fiancée posted a picture on Instagram. It showed her and her first love, Ethan, lying on a bed, partially dressed. There were clear signs of what had happened, scattered on the floor. I couldn't help but comment, "Great pic. Guess we've got the theme for tomorrow's wedding." Then, I grabbed a suitcase and began shoving all her things into it, like I was giving them away for free. Sophie felt bold enough to post that photo because she believed my unwavering devotion meant I wouldn't dare call off the wedding, even after seeing her with another man. She thought I would forgive her without hesitation because of how deeply I loved her. She thought I'd lost all sense of dignity for her. But Sophie seemed to forget something. She had once told me, "Kyle, even if I mess around with others, it will never be real. My first time will always be yours." Yet in that photo, there were obvious signs of what had happened between her and Ethan. It seemed she had long since lost count of how many first times she'd had. Then clarity struck me. If she and Ethan were so in love, then so be it. There was no longer any need for this wedding. At 10 o'clock, I switched my phone back on. Dozens of missed calls flooded in, along with a barrage of messages from Sophie. As soon as the phone booted up, she called. "What's going on? It's 10 o'clock, and you're still not here for the wedding. Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? You better prepare double the gift money. My bridesmaids are going to be furious. Do you even want to marry me anymore?" I put the call on speaker and said, "You need to apologize to me first, and then to the bridesmaids." In the past, I would have responded gently and tried to meet her demands. But now, I didn't care anymore. I sarcastically replied, "Sophie, are those marks on your neck going to disappear by today? You spent last night with Ethan. How much concealer will you need to cover those up?" "Sophie, today's wedding is canceled," I added. She laughed coldly. "Oh, so you saw my Instagram? Is this your way of getting back at me on our wedding day?" "You've been watching too much TV, Kyle," she said sharply. "If my parents weren't forcing me to marry you, do you think I would? The one I love is Ethan. You may have my body, but you'll never have my heart. Don't think you can use last night against me. I'm giving you one last chance. Get here by 11 o'clock, or forget about this wedding." With that, she hung up. I could imagine her fuming with her bridesmaids about how to deal with me. Just then, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a picture of Sophie sleeping in Ethan's arms. Though she was covered by a blanket, the marks on her neck and the blissful expression on her face made it clear what had happened. Ethan texted, "She's marrying you today, but last night was truly her wedding night." I took a screenshot of Sophie's Instagram post and Ethan's picture, then shared them both on my own Instagram with the caption, "Wedding canceled." Clearly, childhood sweethearts are more suited for each other. My phone exploded with calls from friends and family asking what was going on. Our wedding was scheduled for noon, and it was already half an hour past 10 o'clock. Canceling at this point was no small matter. Sophie's parents called me, asking anxiously, "Kyle, what's going on? Why aren't you here yet? I heard from Sophie's bridesmaids that you two had a fight and you want to cancel the wedding. Marriage is a big deal. You can't just mess around with it like this." I remained silent. I couldn't bring myself to say anything rude to my elders, but deep down, I no longer wanted to be entangled with Sophie. Once I had woken up to the truth, I felt like I had turned to stone. I softly replied, "Professor, I'm not throwing a tantrum or fighting. It's just that Sophie has always loved Ethan, not me. You can see it for yourself on her Instagram." Sophie's father, who was my university professor, had always treated me well. One of the reasons I had tolerated Sophie so much was because of him. I thought to myself, how could a child of such a good teacher turn out this way? But I realized I was wrong. You can't force someone to love you. The professor and his wife didn't like Ethan. Back in college, Ethan had done everything to pursue Sophie, flattering her in every way, but it was all part of his plan to establish himself in the city. He even convinced Sophie to fight with her parents, asking them to help him get a spot to stay on campus. so he could marry her and take care of her. Ethan's grades were terrible, and there was no way he could stay on campus. On the other hand, I had gone from a master's to a PhD under the professor's guidance, winning national scholarships and publishing countless articles. The school had decided to give the campus stay spot to me, and Ethan and Sophie had claimed it was because of my interference. But Sophie believed their nonsensical explanation, convinced that I had snatched the spot from Ethan's hands. Once I finished packing Sophie's things into several suitcases, I was about to call the moving company when Sophie rushed out of the elevator, still in her wedding dress. "Are you done with your tantrum? If so, come with me to the hotel. All our guests are waiting." Looking at her anxious face, I smiled and said, "Sophie, was it last night your wedding night with Ethan already?" She froze for a moment, then I sneered. "I've already informed our friends and family that the wedding is canceled. I wish you and Ethan a happy life together." Sophie exclaimed, "Kyle, have you thought about my parents? They're your professors. Do you have no conscience? Can't you see how embarrassed they'll be at their age?" I took a deep breath and replied, "Oh, when you were shamelessly doing those things, did you ever think about how embarrassed your parents would be? You even posted intimate photos with Ethan online. What else is there to be embarrassed about?" She glared at me fiercely, gritted her teeth, and said, "Fine, I'll promise to have less contact with Ethan in the future. Is that good enough for you? Don't be so unreasonable. Who doesn't have ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends before getting married? I was just going to say goodbye to my past love. After all, I was going to marry you today. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Looking at her disdainful face, I truly regretted the past few years. Why did I ever fall in love with such a person? I showed her the photo Ethan had sent. "I'm not so in love with you that I've let you walk all over me. I'm not going to marry you with a smile while you cheat on me. I packed your things. You might as well take them with you, or I'll have the cleaning staff throw them out." With that, I pushed the suitcases out and slammed the door in her face. Sophie shouted, "Kyle, don't you dare regret this." I ignored her outburst and closed the bedroom door, finally allowing myself to get some sleep. The next day, when I turned my phone back on, it nearly froze from the flood of messages from concerned friends and family. I replied to a few important ones, but then I saw a message from Sophie's father. He urged me to come over as soon as I could. Thinking of how kindly he and his wife had treated me over the years, I felt a pang of guilt and decided to visit them. When I walked in, I found Sophie sitting on the couch, her neck stiff and her expression defiant. "Kyle, didn't you say you weren't getting married? What's the point of convincing my parents to pressure me now? Can't you have any shame?" Professor Smith stood up and said, "Enough, Sophie. Is this how I raised you? You're disappointing me greatly." Sophie shot back, "I'm my own person with my own thoughts. I'm not a puppet that you can control. Just because you want me to like someone doesn't mean I will. I've only ever loved Ethan." She continued, "Kyle is the one who doesn't want to marry me now, not me calling off the wedding. Why blame me? Isn't Kyle the good son-in-law you wanted?" Tears filled her mother's eyes as she said, "Sophie, look at what you've done. How can you expect Kyle to handle this? How could you and Ethan do such things?" Sophie gritted her teeth and glared at me. "Even if I agree to marry you, my heart doesn't belong to you. My body and soul have always been Ethan's." Feeling hopeless, I stepped in front of the professor and his wife. Looking directly at Sophie, I asked, "When I pursued you, did you? I never forced you to do anything against your will. Did I pressure you when I proposed? This relationship has always been built on your consent. So why, all of a sudden, are you claiming it's me or your parents pressuring you now? I thought I was a good boyfriend all these years, but I never imagined you'd see our relationship like this." The professor's hands trembled with anger as he spoke. "You keep saying you love Ethan, but do you even know what kind of person he is? Do you have any idea what he's done? You're clearly under some kind of spell." Sophie stood her ground, facing her parents. "You did everything for Ethan without him ever blaming you, and now you're criticizing him? You're the ones with no conscience." Her mother slammed her hand on the table. "What have we done?" Sophie scoffed. "Do we really need to go over this? You took Ethan's spot at school and gave it to Kyle. Don't pretend. Kyle's spot was earned by sucking up to my dad." The professor gasped, clutching his chest. "What did you just say?" "I've lived my life honestly, and now my own daughter accuses me of underhanded tactics for a student." Sophie stood up dramatically, declaring, "Isn't that true? If it weren't for being your daughter and Ethan encouraging me, I would have reported Kyle long ago." The professor turned pale and pointed at her. "Good. I raised a wonderful daughter. Go ahead, report me now. Get out. Get out. You will regret this." Sophie shot back, storming out of the room. "Just watch. I'll make sure Ethan gets what he deserves." With that, she slammed the door, but the sound of it echoed in the room, and the professor collapsed. I stood frozen as Sophie's mother rushed to his side, trying to help him breathe normally again. My anger was mingled with guilt, but before I could say anything, Sophie turned toward me, her face full of fury. "This is your fault," she screamed, pointing at me like I was the sole cause of all the destruction. I wanted to argue, to tell her that she was the one who caused all of this, cheating, lying, manipulating, but I kept my mouth shut. There was nothing left to say, at least not in that moment. I walked out of the house, leaving the weight of my decision hanging heavily in the air. That was a final end between Sophie and me, or so I thought. In the days that followed, I moved into a small apartment. The wedding was officially off, but the drama didn't end there. Sophie, furious that I had taken control of the situation and exposed her affair, launched a campaign on social media to defame me. She constantly posted about how I had manipulated her, controlled her, and even stolen Ethan's future by taking the campus spot he supposedly deserved. With every post, my anger grew. She twisted the truth in such a cruel way. I received messages of support from some friends, but also from strangers attacking me, believing her version of events. Sophie didn't just destroy what we had. She was trying to destroy my reputation, my career, and my name. Worst of all, she was using her devastated parents to garner sympathy, claiming I was the reason for her father's health crisis. Without me realizing it, Sophie started involving lawyers. I was called into a meeting at work to discuss concerns about my personal behavior. It turned out that Sophie had sent a letter to the university where I worked and studied, alleging that I had plagiarized parts of my academic work and earned my scholarship unfairly through favoritism from her father. Of course, the university had to investigate, and I was suspended during the process. Losing my academic position was a devastating blow, but I wasn't about to let Sophie destroy everything I had worked for. I gathered evidence, emails, papers, correspondences that showed my academic trajectory had been earned fairly, but the damage was done. The accusations spread, and parts of the academic community began to look at me with suspicion. As I fought to clear my name, things only got worse. Sophie, not satisfied with tarnishing me on social media and in my workplace, began reaching out to my family. My parents, who had initially supported me, started receiving calls and visits from Sophie. With her perfect acting, she convinced my mother that I had emotionally traumatized her, claiming I had pressured her into marriage by manipulating her through her father. My mother, who had always believed in the sanctity of marriage, started doubting me. Sophie had turned my family against me, and suddenly, I found myself completely alone. Then, she struck in the most cruel way possible. Sophie showed up at my apartment one rainy morning, claiming she was pregnant. She looked at me with a cold smile and said, "I've thought about it, and despite everything, I'm going to raise this child. Ethan and I have decided, but everyone's going to know you're the biological father." I was completely stunned. How could you be pregnant with my child? We haven't been together in months before everything fell apart. Then the truth hit me. It was another one of her manipulations. She planned to drag me into a legal and financial nightmare, forcing me to pay child support and further ruining my personal and professional life. I didn't know what to do. The pressure was becoming unbearable, but I decided to consult a lawyer. He was blunt. If she took this to court, I would have to prove I wasn't the father. It would be her word against mine, and that wouldn't be enough. We'd need to request a paternity test. But until then, my reputation would remain in jeopardy while the drama unfolded. I began digging into Sophie and Ethan's past, and what I found was worse than I could have imagined. Ethan had been using Sophie from the start. He wasn't interested in building a life with her. He was after her family's wealth and connections. Sophie was nothing more than a tool to him, someone he could exploit and then discard once he'd gotten what he needed. Yet Sophie, blinded by her obsession with him, would do anything for his fake love. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I filed a defamation lawsuit against both Sophie and Ethan, gathering all the evidence I could to expose the destruction they'd been trying to cause in my life. The paternity test was done, and just as I had suspected, I wasn't the father. In court, the truth came out. Sophie and Ethan were unmasked for the liars and manipulators they were. Not only was the paternity claim dismissed, but Sophie was also ordered to pay me damages for the emotional and financial havoc she had caused. In the end, Sophie lost everything. Her reputation was shattered, and her parents, after realizing the full extent of her betrayal, sided with me. Ethan, the man who had used her, disappeared the moment the money ran out. Sophie was left alone, while I slowly began to rebuild my life, though not without scars. The most infuriating part came when Sophie, with nothing left to her name, tried to contact me again. "Kyle," she said, looking for any ounce of pity, "I made a mistake. Can we start over? I've always loved you. I was just confused." The only response I could muster was to shut the door in her face, a small smile of relief escaping my lips. After the trial, where everything was exposed and Sophie and Ethan were ordered to pay damages, I finally started moving on. Despite the emotional toll, I was determined not to let that chapter of my life define me. Sophie had tried to destroy everything I'd built, but she failed. I focused on what truly mattered: my career, my personal life, and my future. Returning to work after the suspension was tough, but with the support of my colleagues and the truth about Sophie's lies coming to light, I regained my academic position and slowly rebuilt my reputation. I continued to publish my research, and with each new achievement, I felt stronger. Every success helped me step out from the shadow Sophie had cast over my life. About 2 years after the chaos, I met Camila. She was nothing like anyone I had known before, smart, kind, and above all, respectful. From the very beginning, she treated me with a level of honesty I hadn't even realized I needed. The time we spent together taught me how relationships could be built on mutual respect and support. Camila always encouraged me in my career and academic projects, but she also made sure I balanced my work with moments of rest, something I had neglected for so long. We grew together, both personally and professionally. With her by my side, I not only excelled at work, but I also started embracing new opportunities. We bought a house together, and eventually we got married. Our relationship was everything Sophie and I could never have had, based on mutual respect, trust, and true partnership. I thought my story with Sophie was completely over, but about 4 years after our breakup, I was blindsided by another legal notice. Sophie was attempting to sue me for emotional compensation, claiming that the time we spent together and the fact that I had promised her a future justified her receiving financial support, even though we had no children and no legal connection. It was absurd, but knowing Sophie, I wasn't entirely shocked. This time, I was prepared. My lawyer laughed when she saw the lawsuit, and we quickly put together our defense. In court, it became clear to everyone that Sophie was desperate. She no longer had her family's support. After learning the full truth about her manipulations, they had cut ties with her. Ethan had abandoned her the moment it was clear she no longer had access to his money. Sophie, unemployed and with no allies, was trying to drag me down again. The judge didn't take her claim seriously, With all the evidence and documentation in my favor, the case was swiftly dismissed. Sophie didn't get a single penny. That was the last time I ever heard from her. Later, through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Sophie was living a life far different from the one she had dreamed of. With no support from her family, she was living in a friend's apartment, barely scraping by with odd jobs. Her family, once influential, had distanced themselves completely after the shame she had brought on them. It was sad, in a way, but at the same time, I knew these were the consequences of her own actions. Meanwhile, my life was heading in the opposite direction. With Camila by my side, my career flourished. I became a respected name in my academic field, and my papers gained international recognition. My work opened doors for consulting and speaking engagements around the world. Having a partner who respected me, believed in my worth, and helped me grow made all the difference. With Camila, I learned that a healthy relationship is about much more than romantic love. It's about respect, mutual support, and constant growth. One evening, as we were having dinner, Camila looked into my eyes and said, "I'm so proud of the man you are and everything we've built together. I'm sure the best is yet to come." Her words touched me deeply because they summed up exactly how I felt. We had come so far together, and I knew that with her, the sky was the limit. Looking back now, I realized that everything that happened, painful as it was, brought me to where I am today. Sophie was a dark chapter in my life, but finding someone like Camila showed me that being with someone who respects you can take you so far. Today, I live the life I've always wanted, free from the ghosts of the past, surrounded by love and prosperity.